this August 1st meeting of the Desert Water Agency Board of Directors to order. We will start with some housekeeping. I ask if there are folks on the call who are attending virtually, if you could mute yourselves until you're ready to provide some public comment, if that's what you're here for today. Also asking for those of us that are in the room to silence our mobile devices for the duration of the open session. I will call on directors in roll call order for discussion and questions in the following order. Director Grasha, Director Bloomer, Secretary Treasurer McKenna, Vice President Bowman, and President Ortega. And all votes will be conducted via roll call. So with that, I'd like to ask Vice President Bowman to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you.
Repeat after me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
You'll get it.
Assistant Secretary Baca, could you lead us, could you take the roll call, please?
Director Grasha,
Present.
Director Bloomer,
Present.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Present.
Vice President Bowman,
Present.
and President Ortega.
Present.
All present.
Thank you. Item number 3 on our agenda is public comment on items not listed on today's agenda. So if there are members of the public attending in person or virtually who would like to speak on a topic related to the Desert Water Agency, but that is not on today's agenda, we ask that you make your presence known, and we will ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. I'll start with Assistant Secretary Baca. Have we received any public comment via email or otherwise?
No comments have been received.
Thank you. So are there members attending virtually who would like to, or members of the audience who are attending virtually who'd like to make public comment on this time? Not seeing any, so we'll move to item 4, public comment on items listed on our agenda. And so again, we ask that you keep your comments to 3 minutes. Are there members of the audience who are attending virtually who'd like to make public comment on an item that is on today's agenda? I don't see any, so we will move to the next item, which is the consent calendar, item number 5. These are items that are considered to be routine and will be acted upon by one motion of the board without discussion, unless there are items listed today that a particular director would like to have pulled for further discussion. Are there any items on our consent calendar that directors would like to talk about further? No? Okay, so I'll look for a motion to accept the consent calendar as presented.
So move.
Thank you. We have a first from Director Grasha.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a second from Director Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Grasha,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. Item number 6 is a public hearing, and apparently we have special procedures for that, which I will refer to. I'm going to start by asking, excuse me, our Finance Director, Ms. Sines, to present the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. On July 7th, 2015, the board adopted Ordinance Number 64, which amended Section 1 of Ordinance 62, which established compensation for each day of service by directors. This amendment fixed the compensation of $389.75 per day of service until subsequently revised by an ordinance. Beginning in May 2020 and each year thereafter, staff performs a compensation and benefit survey and presents it to the Finance Committee in conjunction with the annual budget process. The Finance Committee then makes recommendation as to whether the item should be brought to the full board for consideration of any increase. At its May 25th, 2023 meeting, the Finance Committee met and reviewed the Board Compensation and Benefits Survey. The committee has not made a recommendation as to whether they would like to propose an increase or not in the fee for each day of service. However, they did request that evaluation be provided to the rest of the board for discussion. At the June 6th board meeting, the Board of Directors discussed potentially increasing the rate of pay received by board directors for each day of service by 4.2%. The 4.2% increase is the same rate of increase provided to the employees for the cost of living adjustment for the 23-24 fiscal year. That would bring the total rate of pay to $406.12 per day of service for board directors if increased. According to California Water Code Section 20202, the increase may not exceed an amount equal to 5% for each calendar year following the operative date of the last adjustment. Staff has published a notice of public hearing in the Public Record newspaper on July 6th and July 13th. And if adopted today, this ordinance would become effective on September 30th, 2023, which is 60 days after the adoption date. The fiscal impact of a 4.2% increase would be approximately $9,000. This has already been included in the 23-24 budget so that the funding would be already available and a budget augmentation would not be required if the increase were to be approved today. Legal counsel has reviewed the attached ordinance, and it is staff recommendation to open a public hearing, to present the report, and to receive public testimony and comments. Following the public hearing, if the board desires to increase the rate of pay received by board directors for each day of service to $406.12, staff recommends that the board adopt ordinance number 76. And that concludes my report. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I'll ask for clarification. Well, actually, I see it here. So at this time, I'll open the public hearing portion of this item. So if there are members of the public who are attending virtually or present in the room who would like to speak at this point regarding this item on our public hearing on our agenda, please make yourselves known, and we'd like you to keep your comments to 3 minutes if you can. Thank you. Seeing no comments from the public, I will close the public hearing, and we will move on to discussion by the board. I'll start with Director Gracia.
I have no discussion. I would just move to adopt item, ordinance 74, is it? Ordinance 76 for approval.
Okay, thank you. Director Bloomer.
I just have a quick, we'll still have the same process of each year looking at it and deciding if we want to make a recommendation for an increase.
That is correct. We can continue that same process annually.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Excuse me. The current practice is for the executive committee to decide what are sanctioned events that directors can go to. And some directors have been assigned responsibility to look or to attend meetings of other agencies. But I don't see that in this policy. What's going to happen to that?
There are lists that have been adopted by the board that include those items, those events that the board can attend and receive compensation for. That is nothing has been addressed in this revision. So we are only changing section 1 of the ordinance, combining ordinance number 62 and 64 into one ordinance, and it updates and consolidates section 1.
That seems to leave us two different places where there's a policy in place. One is the executive committee agreement to sanction an event, but the executive committee is not authorized by this ordinance to do that.
So we have the listings that the board has approved for the events.
I understand that, but it's not. It has no basis. It's a list, but it's not referred to in this ordinance. So how does it apply?
I would need to defer to legal counsel on that, as this has only been revised for section 1.
Mm-hmm.
we adopted a separate ordinance for that. Isn't it?
Okay. Nice.
And
Yeah, yeah. I get, excuse me again. I guess my issue is that the board has not authorized the executive committee to create that list. So it has no standing, really.
I think
The-
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the executive committee came up with a recommendation which goes to the board for approval. Is that correct?
The
Jess?
current listings are approved by the board. There are external meetings. There are other events that was just recently approved, just, I believe, last month, that added additional place for us to add other things that didn't fall into the two listings that we currently had for items that are not included in the ordinance under section 2. So they are board-approved listings.
Yeah, I guess my issue is that if we make a list of sort of sanctioned organizations and we put it in here, we need to, well, let me ask you this. Is it appropriate if the executive committee decides something and puts it in their minutes and we approve the minutes? Is that the same thing as a board action to authorize the event?
I don't
No.
believe so. No, I think I think that item would need to come to the board for approval.
Then I think there's a gap here between, what's in this ordinance and what we currently do. And I can see a situation where a member of the public will show up one day and say, you guys went to the Urban Water Institute with no authority whatsoever.
I think that it seems like this gives the executive committee the flexibility to add and remove things without having a public hearing.
That's right.
Isn't that right?
That is correct.
That is
But,
correct.
but not without board action.
Right.
So the board needs to act on it.
The board has to approve all the meetings.
This has to be advertised like a month ahead of time. There's a process for this, whereas the
For the
way
pub-
that,
Right.
So that's correct. And so if the board's desires to change the amount, then the statute requires that you go through the public hearing process, adopt an ordinance, becomes effective 60 days, no sooner than 60 days after that. But in terms of the list of events, that doesn't require a public hearing. It only requires board action. Yeah. And that's by statute. Two different statutes at work.
All right, I get it now, but I think we need to tidy this up. We need to have that list that we've all got in our folders, I'm sure, of sanctioned meetings and travel days and so on. That list needs to be submitted to the board, correct?
The lists have
Fine.
already been submitted to the board, and they have been approved in previous meetings.
Yeah, that was a board action that approved that
Wasn't it
list.
already?
And if you want to add an item, the executive committee has been reviewing those requests, and that's how the following item is an example of that. It's coming to the board for a vote. So the executive committee is kind of regulating which items come before the board to get added to the list. However, there's a way if I think 3 board members during your comments, if you wish something to be on the agenda, it's automatically going to be on the agenda.
Whether the executive committee
Yeah,
says so or
so
not.
that's how you get around the executive committee.
I just don't remember taking a board action, but we did. My fault for no. All right, I appreciate that. Thanks. That solves my concern.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
No questions or comments.
Okay, well, that leaves me then. Well, I understand there is some interest on this board to increase the stipend related to these days of service. I'm personally not in favor of that, and we'll be voting against it when we take that roll call vote. And for that, we can move I'll look for a motion.
Mr. President, I move we adopt ordinance 76, establishing compensation, reimbursements, and expenses for directors.
Thank you. I have a first, and I'm looking for a second.
I'll second that.
Okay, I have a second, a first from Director Gracia and a second from Secretary Treasurer McKenna. May we have a vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
No.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Nay.
Motion passes 3-2.
Okay, thank you. So we can move on to the next item, which is another action, which is an action item. We'll start with 7A, request board action regarding application for leave to present late claim Joseph A. Cruz. General Manager Kraus.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Attached for the board's review is an application for leave to present late claim filed by David Casey, attorney at law, on behalf of Joseph Cruz. The application for leave is regarding an incident that occurred December 19th, 2022. The claimant, Mr. Cruz, is a representative of the Southern California Edison Company, who was performing a regular check of the electric meter at a water pump near an artificial lake. He was injured when he fell through a grate, which is part of the pumping facility, which belongs to the Welks Resort Cathedral Canyon Country Club. Claimant has submitted several claims, one to the County of Riverside, one to the City of Cathedral City, one to the Coachella Valley Water District. The county and Cathedral City rejected the claim due to alleged lack of jurisdiction. On June 30th, 2023, CVWD accepted the late claim. Later, on July 11th, it was discovered that the Welks Resort Cathedral Canyon Country Club spans multiple jurisdictions. The location of the grade is about half a mile outside of CVWD's jurisdiction and inside DWA's jurisdiction. DWA management has indicated that the equipment does not belong to DWA. Therefore, we are not responsible for maintenance of the water pump or any of those facilities. The water pump and the equipment is for private well use for the golf course as an irrigation well, which belongs to the resort, the Cathedral Canyon Country Club. There's no fiscal impact to the agency. Our council has reviewed this, and staff is recommending that the Board of Directors deny permission to file a late claim. That's it.
Okay. It's kind of abrupt.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay.
That's
I was
our
like- I was
recommendation. That
waiting
was
for-
the end.
I was waiting for the next line. All right, thank you. So questions from the Board of Directors. We'll start with Director Gracia.
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Director Bloomer.
No questions.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Here I go again, sorry. The attorneys say that we are mandated to grant this application. Is that true?
There is a way for them to ask the court to order the agency to grant the application. But no, you're not mandated unless the court says so. The issue here is that they're asking for permission to file a claim against the agency for an injury that occurred at a facility that the agency does not own, operate, or control. So and I think Sylvia actually communicated that back to the attorney who requested permission to file the late claim. And I don't believe that he ever responded to that.
No, there's been no response. I told them I think they're just frustrated. They've been going back and forth to different agencies. But
So,
I-
he could have responded by saying, that's okay, I want to proceed with my application anyway, but he didn't even say that. And so my recommendation has been to deny the application. If they feel that they do have a basis for it, then they can, go through the legal proceeding to get the court to order the agency to grant the application. If that were to happen, then what they would do is they would file a claim, and my recommendation would be to deny the claim for that same reason. So I think they're chasing, I don't think there's any pay dirt at the end of that, so, for them.
Quicker and cleaner for everybody to just deny it here. I think from our agency's perspective, it's a no-hope. It's a no-hoper. You know, we have nothing to do with that facility. Thank goodness, because it's, you know, it looks awful. But yeah, I think we should deny this claim.
Thank you.
This application to make claims.
Right, thank you. Vice President Bowman.
No questions or comments.
And none from me either, so I'll look for a motion to, excuse me, I'll look for a motion to, I guess, accept staff's recommendation.
I'll move that.
Okay, I have a first from Secretary Treasurer McKenna. I'll look for a second.
I'll second.
Thank you, Director Bloomer. May we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye,
Motion passes.
thank you. So item 7B, request authorization for board compensation for attendance at Arden Wallam's retirement celebration. General Manager Kraus.
Thank you again, Mr. President, members of the board. It was recently announced that Arden Wallam will be retiring this month after serving over 18 years as Mission Springs Water District's general manager. DWA's board and staff have been invited to recognize and celebrate Mr. Wallam on his service to MSWD at a community dinner on Thursday, August 3rd at the Mission Lakes Country Club. It is the wish of President Ortega to have interested DWA directors participate and attend the special recognition. Since it is not on the list of compensable events, staff is bringing this item to the full board for their consideration. The fiscal impact is none. The budget already includes 10 events per month for all the directors. Legal counsel has reviewed this item. If the board desires to attend, staff recommends that the board of directors approve and authorize compensation for attendance at Mr. Wallam's retirement event in service to the board. And that concludes my report.
Thank you. Are there any questions or comments from directors, starting with Director Gracia?
I have no comments, no questions.
Thank you. Director Bloomer? No questions or comments. All right. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
No comments.
Okay. And Vice President Bowman?
None from me.
Okay. Neither do I. So I'll look for a motion to accept staff's recommendation.
I'll make a motion to accept staff's recommendation.
Thank you. I'll look for a second.
I'll second that.
Thank you. I have a first from Director Bloomer and a second from Vice President Bowman. And may we have a roll call vote, please?
Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Thank you. So we have item number 8 is a discussion item, and I'll start. Discussion item A8A. Sorry, Chromium 6 presentations by DWA staff and Todd Groundwater, and we'll start with Assistant General Manager Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. At the July 5th board meeting, staff was asked to provide an update on Chromium 6 for the board. So today we have asked our lab director, Paul Monroy, who is here in attendance, and via Zoom, Senior Engineer Maureen Riley and Associate Geologist Arden Wells with the consultant firm Todd Groundwater. They both worked with the subbasin GSAs, Indio subbasins GSAs on the Sigma planning documents. And we have asked all of them to present PowerPoint presentations on Chromium 6. We will first start with Mr. Monroy and then move to Ms. Riley, Ms. Wells. And with that, Mr. Monroy.
Thank you, Steve, and good morning to the board. So I'll give a brief overview on hexavalent chromium. Also, let's see if that's working. Doesn't look like it. Okay. All right, that's good. just go over some of the health risks that are involved with hexavalent chromium. What are the current regulations in California, and what are some of the upcoming regulations that we're getting? Our testing history at DWA, what are our current results, and what are some of the treatment recommendations that we had studied in the past in order to remove hexavalent chromium and some of the other contaminants that we may see. So some of the health risks associated, of course, Chrome 6 can cause chronic and long-term exposure. Chronic and long-term exposure to chromium 6 can cause issues that relate to liver toxicity, gastrointestinal tumors, liver cancer, reproductive toxicity, and developmental toxicity. The MCL of 10 micrograms per liter was established originally in California, and it would estimate to be a 1 in 2,000 chance of developing cancer during the lifetime of exposure, which is calculated at 70 years. Basically, the toxicity of Chrome 6 as it enters the body through either inhalation or through digestion is that it reduces into the cells and causes issues with both the biological processes in the cells and damages the DNA over time. It goes from Chrome 6 to Chrome 5 to Chrome 4 to Chrome 3, and as it releases these electrons, it damages the different chemical molecules in the cell and damages the processes that they're trying to accomplish, essentially. So current regulation for Chrome 6 is that we actually only measure total chromium. So total chromium is a combination of Chrome 3 and Chrome 6 in the water with an MCL of 50. California is the only state that has developed its own MCL, where all the other states follow a 100 micrograms per liter, 100 parts per billion MCL for total chromium. So there's no hexavalent chromium, Chrome 6 regulation currently. The proposed regulations from California is to adopt a 10 micrograms per liter, 10 parts per billion maximum contamination level with a reporting limit of 0.1 parts per billion. The public health goal for Chrome 6 is 0.02 parts per billion. And only a few laboratories have stated that they're capable of detecting down to that level. And no studies have been done in terms of the chronic toxicity at that level, so or below 1 parts per billion currently. So the rulemaking in California was proposed for comment on June 16th. The meeting is actually going to be tomorrow at the State Water Board to go over these proposed MCLs. And if adopted, the state board would propose that any water district that has more than 10,000 service connections would need to comply within 2 years of that proposal. So we have to be below the 10 parts per billion MCL. So our our testing history, in the beginning when we started looking for Chrome 6, it was proposed under the unregulated monitoring contaminant rule by the federal EPA to measure across the United States these, to see if there's a prevalence of Chrome 6. We tested it between 2013 and 2018, where we got an average of 1.8. Our range was, 0.1. Our range was 0.12 micrograms per liter to 4.2 micrograms per liter, with an average of 1.8 micrograms per liter. We had 2 wells, well 11 and well 18, which are standby wells, so they're not running normally, only in case if we need them. They had a range of 4.2 and 5.4 micrograms per liter for that. So below the MCL, but still about half of that. Between 2015 and 2018, the California put in the regulation with Chrome 6 monitoring at 10 ppb. And so we were required to test every 3 years for that. And we got a range between non-detect, so less than 0.1 micrograms per liter, all the way to 3.9 micrograms per liter in our active wells. Currently, between 2018 and 2023, the California MCL of 10 was overturned due to some procedural issues. And so the MCL was reverted back to 50 micrograms per liter for total chromium. So that is what we currently are testing for, total chromium. And all of our wells have been non-detect for total chromium with a reporting limit of 10 micrograms per liter. So it's non-detect because it's below what our detectable levels were in the past. The MCL is higher than the detectable levels were in the past. So some of the recommendations by the state was to develop a best available technology for treatment of hexavalent chromium. They identified 3 technologies, which was ion exchange, reduction, coagulation and filtration, and reverse osmosis. The best available technology means that this treatment should be able to remove the contaminant below the MCL, and the public water systems are not limited to these best available technologies. So we could use other technologies if they're approved, and if we can find that they are better for us in terms of the financial impact. So in summary, Desert Water Agency continues to remain in compliance and deliver safe drinking water to our customers. Desert Water Agency has explored in 2018 the use of reverse osmosis to remove hexavalent chromium. Reverse osmosis is an accepted method for removal of many contaminants, and once installed in a well site, it will remove other components also. So if there's any other organics, inorganics, this would also be able to remove those levels below the MCL. To remove Chrome 6 from one well site was estimated to be at $2,016,000, and this was from 2018. So the numbers nowadays that I got updated by our engineering staff is that it would probably be double that amount to remove it from one well site, with a maintenance cost, annual maintenance cost of $31,508. The cost to remove Chrome 6 from the entire system would be estimated at $70,650,000 for the initial construction and $1,071,510 for maintenance, annual maintenance costs. This would mean that the agency would have to increase the cost per service connection to the customer of more than $3,230, and that's an estimate from 2018. So we're looking at probably double that in the figures today. So if there's any questions regarding that on data, I'll glad to answer.
Thank you, sir. Director Grasha.
Just to clarify, on the proposed regulations, you mentioned here that that service agencies with 10,000 service connections would be or more would be required to comply within 2 years. What does comply mean?
So the process would be that we test all of our wells, any well that is above the MCL, we would be required to continuously test for a certain amount of time. If we continue to exceed that MCL, then we have to go through a process of developing a treatment for it. So it could be, putting in a reverse osmosis facility, blending, there's a number of options that we can address to do that.
So you would have 2 years to remove the chrome 6
To be
from the
bel-
system, or that
Yeah.
well is required to shut down.
Correct.
So to say that if every well in our district exceeded that 10 that the state's proposed, $5 million per well. So that somewhere around 50 million
Hmm.
to 70 million, I guess. But since this agency doesn't serve any water with that, Desert Water Agency as a whole is in the clear. Unfortunately, where I live, I'm served water from a system that is inundated with chromium-6, nearly double the state's proposed recommendation. And apparently, every well that serves the city of Desert Hot Springs exceeds the 10 that we're talking about here. Not a single person in Desert Hot Springs receives water that is below the 10 micron, or 10 that's proposed. It's a serious situation.
Just to kind of follow up on that, I believe in the UCMR testing, the Desert Hot Springs in the, I think, Mission Springs Water District was closer to 18 than 20, which is
Right.
what you're saying, yes.
Yeah. So it's a serious situation for people that live within the boundaries of Desert Water Agency, but not for people that are delivered water from Desert Water Agency. It can get complicated for people that might catch this on a later meeting, on YouTube. And what are they talking about? Well, as we begin to watch what other agencies do, like Mission Springs, and how they react to this, it'll be an interesting couple of years in my view. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Director Bloomer,
No questions or comments. Thank you for the presentation.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
No comments at the moment.
Thank you. And Vice President Bauman.
None from me.
Okay. I do have a question. Do we, or do you happen to know how the other water agencies in the Coachella Valley are faring? I mean, we've talked about Mission Springs, we've talked about Desert Water Agency, but perhaps Coachella Valley Water District or some of the municipal districts.
Yes, so I was a part of a project probably about 8 years ago where Coachella Valley was doing a study to remove hexavalent chromium using an alternative treatment technology. The laboratory that I had worked for was doing the analytical work to try to get down to the lower levels for their testing. So they are dealing with hexavalent chromium in their wells. For some of their production wells, they were in the 20 range. And that data is available. You can see it in the Federal Register looking through the UCMR method, so it is available to view.
Thank you.
I might
Yes.
add that Coachella just received a $500,000 grant to study the theory that Coachella Valley is, CVWD is doing. I think Friday it was announced, $500,000. And that's the injection of stannous chloride to use to reduce the chromium-6. We'll see how that works out. That'll be overseen by a director from Coachella Valley Water District as well. So it's an interesting little mix of people involved in that down there. So we'll see how it
And
goes.
just to be clear, I think you're referring to the city of Coachella as opposed to Coachella Valley Water District. Is that
Well,
correct?
the director, Estrada,
Mhm.
is the guy at the city of Coachella
That's
that will
right.
be overseeing the,
Right. I was doing that more for the public.
yeah.
To clarify
Thank you.
that. Thank you. All right. So unless there are any other questions for Mr. Monroy, we can move on to the next presentations, I guess. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, President Ortega. Yes, I'd like to introduce Maureen Riley with Todd Groundwater.
Hi, I'm going to share my screen and we have a PowerPoint presentation. There's a little bit of overlap, lots of same content. Hi, I'm Maureen Riley with Todd Groundwater, and we're here today to give you a little bit of the information about chromium in the groundwater and potential sources. I'm here today with Arden Wells, Associate Geologist, and we both worked, as Steve mentioned, on the alternative plan for the Indio Subbasin. And we did quite a bit of water quality analysis for that, and we're here to show some of those results. We're going to start with a general introduction to hexavalent chromium. I know the lab director already gave a great overview. We'll reiterate some of those points and add a few more. And then we'll talk about the sources of chromium, what we had for Indio and what is summarized from Mission Creek alternative plans, and then recommendation for groundwater management and groundwater monitoring. I'm going to turn it over to Arden.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Arden, Associate Geologist at Todd Groundwater. And prior to joining Todd, I conducted research related to metals and groundwater in the Central Valley. So I will admit I tend to geek out on this sort of stuff. So please let me know if you have any clarifying questions. On this slide, we were going to provide a background on hexavalent chromium and the regulations surrounding it, but Mr. Monroy did such an excellent job of, covering all of that I don't want to reiterate him. And the one thing to add on this slide is that throughout California, in many basins, we do see that hexavalent chromium is the most common form of chromium in groundwater. So often when there are total chromium measurements, while we can't know how much is hexavalent chromium until it's tested, a large proportion of that tends to be hexavalent chromium in California. So on to the next slide. There are kind of two main ways that chromium can get into groundwater. The first one is human-caused or anthropogenic sources, generally from waste, and Maureen's going to cover that. But in California, the most common source of chromium is naturally occurring chromium, and that originates from the rocks. I took a little geologic map surrounding the Indio Subbasin and looked through the surrounding formations for ones that could contain naturally higher sources of chromium in the rocks. So a lot of the metamorphic rocks that we have in California tend to just have higher natural levels of chromium in them than in most other rocks, especially in other parts of the country. In fact, the state rock of California, serpentinite, is a little bit notorious for having higher levels of chromium than other rocks. And so these metamorphic rocks, they erode and the sediment fills basins with alluvium, and then that alluvium is the aquifer that the groundwater is sitting with. So when the groundwater interacts with the rocks, it can begin to have dissolved chromium in it that can then be pumped out by the wells. So I didn't dig into too deeply exactly which formation is most likely the guilty party here in the Indio Subbasin for contributing the most chromium, but in this map I circled some potential suspects. And then in the next slide, Maureen will share about anthropogenic sources. Oh, I do want to add one more thing, which is that often the naturally occurring chromium, it can be in deeper parts of the aquifers, while the human caused sources tend to be in the shallower portions.
Exactly. And we didn't want to rule out potential sources. So we went to look at where chromium is and the anthropogenic sources. Landfills, metal processing facilities are usually the big components of introducing chromium to a groundwater aquifer. the Regional Water Control Board looks at any facility that might be impacting water quality. And they put all of these facilities on an online tool called GeoTracker. So the map there shows the DWA service area, which is not quite right on the GeoTracker tool, but is helpful to know where you are. And those colored dots represent regulated facilities that might be impacting water quality. We went through all of these. There's a lot of closed LUST sites. LUST stands for Leaky Underground Storage Tank, usually gas stations with gasoline and VTEX, not a chromium source. There are 3 open cases in the area, and those are all dry cleaners, which would be volatile organic compounds, again, not a chromium source. And finally, there was one inactive on the Army Airfield base that was also LUST, again, a gas station. So there is no smoking gun for chromium anthropogenic source in the DWA area. And we'll talk a little bit about that depth. Again, like Arden mentioned, the man-made usually comes from the surface because that's the source of chromium, where natural would come from below and sides where the rocks are. So we looked at the depth, and that's Arden will talk about that in the next 2 slides.
Thank you. So Maureen and I contributed to the NDO Subbasin 2022 Alternative Plan Update. And as part of the studies that were conducted for the plan update, we looked at the distribution of hexavalent chromium, both geographically, so in map view, and also vertically looking at cross sections and the chromium levels with depth. So the map here is showing the distribution of chromium in the NDO subbasin. So the red areas are those that have greater than the 10 parts per billion former and potentially future MCL for hexavalent chromium. So we see those occurring kind of in the central eastern portion of the subbasin, but south of the DWA service area. The yellow areas are where we see 5 to 10 micrograms per liter chromium. So beneath the drinking water past and potential future limit, but still a little bit higher than non-detect or less than 5. And then the blue are the areas where we are generally seeing low chromium beneath 5 micrograms per liter. And for these maps, because chromium isn't sampled in every well every year, we had a data set ranging from 1990 to 2019, and we mapped the most recent chromium sample for each well. And we decided to use that method both to have a larger distribution, but also because we did look at chromium levels over time for each of these wells, and we didn't see any clear increasing trends. The chromium levels in each well, at least for the ones that had multiple samples, appeared to be pretty stable, which is good news that it's not increasing in many areas. And we also compared the total chromium concentrations to the hexavalent chromium concentrations measured in each well, and they were about equal. And so most of the total chromium that's being measured in the NDO subbasin, generally most of it will be hexavalent chromium. So that's just good to keep in mind when looking at total chromium measurements, which are often measured more frequently and more inexpensively than hexavalent chromium. So on the next slide, I have a couple of examples of the groundwater quality cross sections that we looked at as part of the alternative plan update. So for these, we drew lines across an area of the subbasin and identified all of the wells that had in a hexavalent chromium measurement in the 1990 to 2019 year range. And so on the left is B to B prime, the cross section that's cutting north to south, somewhat through the DWA area. And so you can see on the southern side of the Garnet Hill Fault, we have several wells with measurements, and the colored area showing the screened interval in each well with depth. And so the blue areas are areas that have less than 5 parts per billion hexavalent chromium. And we see one well that has 5 to 10 parts per billion hexavalent chromium, but we don't see any that are greater than 10 parts per billion in this region, at least along that cross section. To the right, I'm showing a cross section K to K prime that's kind of following the southeastern area, cutting through Indio in the Indio subbasin. And I'm just showing an area where we did see the higher chromium levels that had that red area on the map we showed in the last slide. And I thought this one was particularly interesting because we see the 10 to 25 parts per billion uranium levels in the deeper parts of the aquifer. Those are shown in the little cross section in red. And there are a few wells that are showing 5 to 10 parts per billion hexavalent chromium, but those are somewhat shallower than the deeper wells that are showing the higher concentrations. And so once again, this is suggesting, both because it's relatively widespread, but also because we're seeing the hexavalent chromium in the deeper parts of the aquifer, that the source is probably coming from the sediments. It's a geologic, naturally occurring origin, as opposed to a human contamination origin for the chromium.
We also looked at the Mission Creek Subbasin Alternative Plan, and we're summarizing what they have for chromium here. They have maps showing the concentrations of measurements, as well as a time concentration plot, which we'll show on the next slide. There was about 13 wells, and the chromium concentrations are variable between the wells. As the board member just spoke, there are definitely wells with high chromium, nearby wells with lower chromium. This does suggest naturally occurring. It could be the depth of the wells, and there might be alternatives to treatment if you can find wells that are deeper or shallower with less or more chromium. And there might be variability within the aquifer. We looked at their time concentration plots, and as Arden mentioned, we saw the same thing in Indio. There's pretty stable concentrations on these wells. They don't change over time. This one is showing each individual well is a different color, but that vertical line shows when recharge started happening in the Mission Creek subbasin. And the concentrations of chromium didn't seem to change greatly. They're nice, stable signature of a naturally occurring chromium. So while it is variable, at least it's not increasing in the Mission Creek subbasin. Overall, there are a lot of wells in the Indio and Mission Creek Basin that are looking at total chromium and Chrome-6. As you've just heard from Mr. Monroy, there's a lot. DWA is monitoring the production wells and sampling for total chromium annually. That's part of the Title 22 requirements for California. And given for chromium in groundwater, given that it's naturally occurring and not increasing, this level of monitoring is adequate for the groundwater management. If you want to look at additional sources of information, a good source of information are those small public water supply systems. Again, the board member just mentioned Desert Hot Springs and Mission Springs. They are also required to monitor for chromium, and they have been, and collecting that data might give you a better idea of the systems that are being affected. Again, DWA's production wells look okay, but there are other wells in the area that might have high chromium. So that's all we have. The summary is that for groundwater management, the chromium monitoring is adequate, and we believe it's naturally occurring. So it will continue to be this level of chromium, hopefully not increasing into the future.
Thank you. Director Grasha, do you have questions?
Yeah, if You were advising a water district. Would you characterize this as a critical part of the agency's need to comply with this? Is that something that should be a priority within an agency?
I think water quality in general should be a priority with all agencies. And the relative priority of chromium with respect to the other constituents would depend on where you are and the concentrations of your specific wells.
Right. So if that's my point. The state's saying 10 micrograms per liter, and you're required to eliminate that within 2 years. It seems to me that would be a priority of an agency that fell within that category. Do you agree with
Right.
that?
Yes, we work with an agency that has chromium over the 10, and they're working on a blending solution to get their water supply below the 10 in advance of the MCL coming out. So that is a priority. If you're already exceeding the 10, it should be a priority. It doesn't have to be wellhead treatment. There are other treatment opportunities. But if you're not at the 10, you should look at the water quality portfolio as a whole and not just chromium. There's a lot of constituents out there.
I was watching the Mission Springs meeting last week, and I was horrified that they're considering borrowing $20 million to build a solar system. We have a solar system. Another 35 million or more for a new building. Well, we have a new building. It seems to me that, I was researching various ways that we could work together as a couple of agencies. I'm beginning to think that might not be possible. I hold out hope that it is. But the state of California has $100 million to $150 million available for agencies that take that leap and are encouraging with cash, $10,000 per connection, minimum $15,000 per connection if you meet certain income requirements that I'm not sure that the people in Mission Springs meet, but they do meet the $10,000 meter connection, low
Yeah.
income.
There's definitely been a concern about agencies having the financial resources to implement
Right.
this MCL. And that's part of the reason why it was turned back a few years ago. It was proposed as 10, but then agencies had a hard time. And so I think the state is gearing up to have money available to make it feasible for any agency to implement
Right.
the new MCL.
And the way you get that is the agency combines with a neighboring agency that can help stabilize an agency that financially that is basically unstable. Mission Springs had nearly 100% turnover in their staff in the last 3 years, and there's a host of issues, in my view, that need to be addressed and could easily be addressed if this board ever wanted to explore that. But the idea that there's $100 to $150 million available to solve this problem and many other problems that are not considered a priority at Mission Springs, it's my view that at some point in the future that we ask legal counsel to come back to the board with his opinion on putting a consolidation on the ballot and allowing the voters to decide whether or not Mission Springs should continue to exist at all. With that, I thank you.
Okay. Director Bloomer.
I don't have any questions or comments. Thank you for your presentation.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
I do have a few. I was wondering, are you going to develop this into a report? When I go through the presentation, I'm zooming in on the images, but I can't necessarily find where everything is. So I'm wondering, is this going to turn into a report where you put a color key on figure 4, for example?
Figure 4, I'm going to go back. Is that the geo-tracker? Oh, the geologic maps. We have a figure similar to this in the alternative plan with a geologic map. It doesn't have Arden's beautiful circles, but anything with from the metamorphic type of rock would typically have chromium.
But I don't see a color key as to what what these different colors mean, and that would be helpful.
Yeah. I think I'll direct you to the alternative plan. We have a geologic map with the color key. We could, I can check in with Mr. Kraus after the meeting on what we should send.
Yeah, we have the reports available, so I'll work on that and direct
And
our director
I'll have to look.
to that information.
I'll have to look up what figure that is because there's a lot of figures in that report.
It would be helpful for this non-geologist to have some landmarks on here. I see the Salton Sea, but I don't know where the rest of these features are. You know, put the freeway on there or something so I can figure out where.
Yeah. Well, I'm an engineer and I can tell the fault is a nice, helpful one for me. You can see where the dotted line is. This is the Garnet Hill Fault in the north. Yeah, I think our one in the alternative plan has some landmarks because it is made for a more general audience.
Yeah, I understand vaguely where the faults are, but I definitely know where the freeway is. So,
well, yeah.
Going
Yeah.
back to the data that you got when you're working on it, you said you had data from 13 wells in.
Well, so we reviewed Mission Springs, and this is just by counting the number of wells that they have on this figure here. They might have more that they just didn't show. And in the time concentration plot, they've only plotted 6.
Yeah, and this is where I have the issue, and it sort of reflects something that Director Gracia alluded to. They have more wells than this, and they must be testing them. Our assistant general manager said they have to be tested every 3 years. So where's the data? I'm particularly concerned, and I will name it here. Well number 27, I've seen numbers that show it's triple the proposed standard, and it's not even on your map, and the data's not here. So I'd like to know more about that. If you can find it, great. If not, maybe I'll talk to Mission Springs and try and find it.
We didn't write the alternative plan for Mission Creek. We've just been reviewing it. They're required to monitor total chromium, and it might not be on this map because it is only total and not hexavalent. But as Arden said, they're pretty total chromium can help indicate how much is chromium-6, but oftentimes I don't want to mix and match.
Well, if they're required, and I know they're required to monitor total chromium, and they must do that on all their wells. But
all their water supply wells will have to monitor for total chromium.
Yeah, it seems strange to me that they haven't done chromium-6 on all their wells. I believe they have, and I believe they're not sharing that data. I'd like to see it.
Their total chromium would have to be reported to the state. So the Division of Drinking Water has a database of all water quality. So they're required to report their total chromium for each well. So we could look that up.
Well, let's do that. When I study their system, I see that they have interconnections that can tell you what well is serving what districts. A well that's got a level of 27 doesn't serve the whole Mission Springs district, but it might serve where I live, and it's impossible to tell. They have different pressure zones. They have different valves they can open or close depending on the demand in different parts of the city. I really want to get into this a bit more. So I appreciate the data you've got, but I think there's data missing. When you say data is available from 13 wells, they have more wells than that. Where's the rest of the data?
That was just reported in the alternative plan. I'm actually looking on the Gamma website right now, which is part of the water board, but they use data from the Division of Drinking Water, and you can look up individually for each well. Here, I'm gonna hopefully. This is a regional board tool, and you can look up in your area, and I should be able to see dots, but I hope it might not come up. But this is a really good way. You can look at any chemical and search just chromium, and we can help dig into what data they've reported to the state for their drinking water wells. It's not coming up now. My computer's too slow. So we'll look at that and send it.
It's always a way when somebody's looking over your shoulder, right?
Yeah.
Okay, but it's a great report. I mean,
just to kind of follow up on that. So the state water the state water board has a database called SidWiz online, and that is where all of the data from the laboratories that get uploaded to. So you can see it from what the current data that has been run, when is the next sampling date, and you can break it down by individual wells. So if I'm not mistaken, for Mission Springs, it did have only a limited number of wells that are reported to the state. So the other wells could either be standby or non-production wells, or they are private wells.
I'd appreciate it if you send me a link to that.
Okay.
No, I'm still gathering facts here.
Adam,
that's all.
phantom data all over.
Anything else? Okay. Vice President Bowman.
Yes, and pardon me, my allergies are acting up, so if I cough or whatever, I apologize. I have to clear my throat. I want to pull back 50,000-foot view on this, and with our consultants that are zooming in here, could we just summarize the nationwide standard is 100, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. That's a federal limit right now for total chromium.
Federal. And then the 50 is the proposed, or the current California.
Correct.
And now they're proposing to go to 10.
Correct.
Do we know the science behind their reasoning to drop it? Why not drop it to 25? Why not drop it to 5? Do we know the driver behind this change?
So the initial testing started under UCMR, so it's an unregulated monitoring contaminant rule, where the federal EPA created a testing method. So it's 218.7, EPA 218.7, and they developed what the detection limits are and what the estimated detection limits are for those for that analysis for hexavalent chromium. And it was found that they can get down to about 0.02 parts per billion in the detection level, but accurately they could probably only detect 1 parts per billion.
I guess what I'm asking is, do we have evidence that 50 or 10 is better for the health of people? Do we have evidence that there are problems with the various levels? I mean, obviously, it'd be nice to have none, but I believe we still have to have some biologically for our body's sake.
Yes, so there is a, in California, they have a guidance document for hexavalent chromium that goes over the toxicology, how they came up with the 10. Part of it is the feasibility of detection by the methods that are their accuracy. Part of it is how much can we remove from the water and still make it economically viable, with the treatment. So they have to come up with a number that says, okay, 10 MCL should be that over 70 years, if you continue to drink below that level, you only have so much chance of potentially developing a chronic illness for that. Of course, that can always get changed as new toxicology is developed and how the testing is completed.
I guess I'm still trying to find, is there a smoking gun level that we've been able to detect? My point is simply, if the nationwide standard is 100, I have no trouble with California leading the way. We've always done that. I'm just curious as to what the science is.
Yeah, the toxicology is based on a lot of probabilities. And so you increase your chance of potential cancer the higher the concentrations. But there's no one level that you need to be below or above to be safe. It's all a gray area of what's your chance and what is too likely, again, compared to the method of detection and the ability to treat. So all of these things come into play. There's not just a line that we need to avoid.
I appreciate that. And that's pretty much where I'm at, the conundrum of at what point do we have damage to humans? And of course, I'm not wanting to damage humans as a director. So I just found it interesting. I think I was at an Aqua meeting probably 15 years ago, and one of the speakers was one of the scientists from CVWD, and he did a presentation on this. How far down do we test? And at what point then do we clean the water? And do we have science to back up that the 10 is the good mark, or should it be 50 like it currently is, or should it be like the nationwide of 100? And I thought that was an interesting philosophical question. And when you have naturally occurring Chrome-6 versus the anthropogenic caused, such as the polluted water by humans, we have two different animals as well. So I appreciate the conversation, and I think we have to watch this carefully. But I'd like to find out from the state, what is their driver, and if anybody can reveal that to me, I'd like to know it.
Yeah, there's a lot of information because their last attempt at making it 10, all the way back in 2014, got so much public outcry that they've gone back, and there's a lot of science behind it. And it's currently proposed, but it's expected to pass this time because they have gone back and done a lot of that work, not just the toxicology, but also the economic feasibility part. So there is science there, and it is available, and they're making it as publicly available as they can. It is pretty dense, technically.
Great, thank you.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna.
Well, I think Director Bowman makes a good point, but there was a point in the history of tobacco where the tobacco industry said, well, no, it doesn't cause cancer. We don't believe that. We don't know. Science is, and I researched it, it's a little bit all over the place, as it was with tobacco back then. But I think your question is to what level? It's a lot like saying, how many cigarettes a day can I smoke and not get cancer? There isn't an answer to that. You just raise the probability, as our geologist said. The more there is, the more the risk there is. So the state came up with the standard of 10 based on a 1 in 2,000 chance of having a serious health problem if you drink it for 70 years. And you don't have to drink it either. You can inhale this in the shower. It seems like a decent standard to me. It's what it's going to be. The state has not handed out any money to make water districts like Coachella Valley and Indio, the other smaller districts. They haven't given them any money to implement it. The Stannis chloride grant is good news, but the byproduct of that treatment is radioactive.
That's the way I feel.
So you end up with another problem.
Highly suspect, that's for sure.
We need to keep eyes and ears open on this one. It's not affecting our customers right now, but it's affecting 3 of the people on this board. So, we're interested. Thanks.
Director Gracia.
Correct me if I'm wrong, staff, but as I recall, it was the California Department of Health that created the 10 standard, and it was adopted by the Department of Water Resources and then overturned by court because there was no financial mechanism in place. So, it comes from the doctors and the scientists, and it was, not, I think you'd have to go back to that department to really figure out how they came up with this. But the good news for us is we don't have to make that determination. The state of California is making that determination for us, and we have to comply with it or make sure that our customers are being served by an agency that is willing to comply with it. I served on the Mission Springs Water Board for 4 years, and we've spent more time in the first 5 minutes of this agenda item than the entire 4 years I served on that board. The idea that you could know that your water exceeds the state's proposed standard and advertise your water to young children as the best water in the world, to me, is diabolical. And they did that for decades. And I won't forgive the agency for doing that or the board members that pushed that propaganda. And in my view, I'm looking forward to the potential for serious action on this. Thank you.
Thank you. I have no questions and my comment would be to thank our 3 presenters for doing a great job of summarizing where the agency is, as well as where our two subbasins that we are responsible for are currently stand with regard to this very serious and potentially serious topic that we will continue to be monitoring as an agency and working with our fellow agencies as well to provide safe drinking water for all the people of the Coachella Valley. So with that, unless there's anything else, I will move on to the next item.
Mr. President?
Yes.
I have a feeling that some of the board members would like us to come back with a little bit more information, maybe more specific to some of those wells that were mentioned. If there's any information in the Mission Creek sub-basin. So is that the direction for staff?
Well, I'll turn it over to our members who live in the Mission Creek sub-basin or served by the sub-basin.
I think it's an ongoing subject that we should address. I don't know how you put that in motion as far, but yeah, I think that if we could get a look at all the wells in the district, it would be helpful for our own ratepayers as well as those within our service area or within the boundaries of our district to understand what's going on. They haven't been given the advantage of knowing what's being hidden from them, and I think it's time we do what we can to make sure that at least there's one place where they can go to get the truth. And I know that this agency is that place. So I don't know how you do that.
We'll take a look at the data that's available, and if we need more, we'll try to get more. We'll also take a look at the, I guess the epidemiology, which is what you're talking about, Director Bowman. And I think there's some information out there that we could present as well.
I would appreciate that, and I know that the debate rages throughout the state. It's not just here. And it would be interesting to find out from your perspective as the GM what your fellow GMers across the state, what their concerns are and what their issues are.
Over the years, I've worked, with Steve Bigley, who was very active in this area for the Coachella Valley Water District, and he did for Aqua's Water Quality Committee. Yep. So I can reach out to him for, I'm sure he has a wealth of information.
I believe he was the speaker at the Aqua that I attended, and it was probably the most enlightening presentation from a scientific perspective that I had heard, with the discussion being, well, how far do we go with our testing? And because it's infinite at that point. Anyway, I'd appreciate a global California perspective of what other water districts are thinking as well, what they're challenged with.
Okay.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna, do you have anything else to add?
It prompted another question. Has anyone tested the effluent that's going back into the aquifer for chromium-6?
We have not, but I think that you can be confident that there's some chromium being added, as it's being used, human interaction with the water. So
yeah, I'd like to know that. We do some here, recycled water.
Yeah, we just in terms of the recharge, we've tested just what we've been getting through Windy Point from the Colorado River water, and we did see levels at about 1.6 micrograms per liter in the last tests that we were running.
I think we're talking about wastewater effluent, though, right?
Wastewater. Okay.
Yeah, so what we're getting from Palm Springs wastewater treatment plant, right? So we'll reach out to Palm Springs and see what kind of information they have on that. But we don't actively test for it. So
a little test we could run, I think.
Do you need anything else from us?
Oh, no, I think I have enough to do.
Okay, good.
Thank you.
All right, so we can move on to the general manager's report.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. First item on the general manager's report is City of Palm Springs update on the grass removal incentive funding rules. On June 29th, the City of Palm Springs Council approved a budget of $1,150,000 towards Grass removal incentives, the previous funding was set to provide $3 per square foot with a maximum incentive of $5,000 per project. So there was a cap or ceiling on that. On Tuesday, July 19th, the Sustainability Commission voted to support updating the funding conditions to encourage more residents, homeowner associations, and businesses to participate. Under the new program, the city will provide $1 per square foot of grass removed. In addition, the new funding has no square foot caps, and it is hoped that the larger HOA projects will be enticed in this way. More money will be available. Funding is now available on a first-come, first-served basis. The incentive program will be administered by DWA. Applicants who apply while city funding is available will receive a total incentive amount of $4 per square foot. The rollout of the new program includes the $1 per square foot, and it went live July 26th, just a few days ago. The next item is the Sites Reservoir Water Right application is moving forward. Last month, the State Water Resources Control Board announced that the Sites Reservoir is moving forward in the process to secure a new water right permit for the project. The next item is a report out on our special joint board meeting and tour with the Mission Springs Water District. DWA and Mission Springs had a joint board meeting on July 25th that featured a tour of the Mission Creek Groundwater Recharge Facility. Elected officials from Desert Water Agency, Mission Springs Water District, Coachella Valley Water District, and the City of Desert Hot Springs attended the meeting and tour. The tour covered the operational details of the site as well as the history. DWA is planning a public tour of the Mission Creek facility, as well as Snow Creek and Whitewater plant in November. DWA will be hosting a blood drive on August 9th between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m., and that will be here at the Desert Water Agency Operations Center. And on our system leak data, between July 11th and July 24th, we had 34 leaks. So I would say that's a little bit on the high side. The pipelines that had leaks that are in the replacement program were in Dreas Road. It's a 6-inch diameter main, Via Vaquero, 4-inch main, Luello Road, 6-inch, and Avenida Caballeros, a 14-inch main. Last item is general manager's meetings and activities. We've had quite a few tribal mediation meetings. The technical committee has had a couple of meetings. I've also discussed participating again in the Palm Springs Festival of Lights participation. In years ago, we used to participate and had a float in the parade, and I suggested to staff that we do that again. We have a lot of young families here at the agency with children that I'm sure would love to ride along on the float and participate. My kids did. I had a great time when I did it back then. So we're looking at doing that, but not expending a tremendous amount of labor and money, but to do something small and nice. So we're looking at that. We're having a lot of meetings on airborne electromagnetic surveying. So DWR is doing the whole state, and their plan is to do the Salton Sea area, which includes the Coachella Valley, obviously. So the Mission Creek GSAs and the Indio GSAs have been meeting with the department, or meeting together to present to the department the areas that we would like to have scanned. So they can only scan the areas where we don't have any population. They won't fly over houses. So we're kind of restricted to areas where there aren't any houses. And also we're interested in fault lines. We want to map those and see how the water's moving across from one basin to another and what that looks like. So there's some good information that should come out of this, but we won't be able to survey the entire basin. I was also I attended meetings over the last 2 weeks for the State Water Project. all their monthly meetings on the DCP, and also the State Federal Contractors Water Authority Board meeting. We had a review. We're getting ready to do a presentation for our Technology Transfer Committee, so we've been working on that. There was several sites reservoir meetings. We had our joint meeting that I went over just a minute ago with Mission Springs. We've had salt nutrient management technical committee meetings, so that plan is moving forward pretty well. Let's see. We had our executive committee meeting and attended a legislative update meeting, and that concludes my report.
Thank you. Director Grasha, do you have any questions for our general manager about his report?
I have no questions and no comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
No questions or comments.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
None for me, thanks.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
None for me, thank you.
Thanks. And none from me. So we will move to item 10. Director's reports on meetings and events attended on behalf of the agency. I'll ask each board member whether they need to report out on any meetings or events that they recently attended on behalf of the agency, and ask them to announce each date of the meeting or event. And we'll start with Director Grasha.
I have a couple. Only one was compensable, but the July 25th meeting of Coachella Valley Water District, they canceled. So I'm looking forward to their next meeting. Those are always very informative. It's where I learned everything that I pretty much shared with you today on the Chromium-6 subject. I attended a Desert Valley Builders Association reception on July 20th, held in Palm Desert, and two directors from Mission Springs were there. I spent quite a bit of time having an animated conversation with one of them, and looking forward to more opportunities to share ideas with them. And of course, the special meeting that was held on the 25th, we did, between the two agencies. But the CVWD meeting that day was canceled. And that's it. I think the rest of them were, the DWA board meeting on the 18th, I guess. And I attended the Sites Joint Authority board meeting virtually. And took my internet security class. That was fun. I only got 80 this time, I think. I think I got one wrong.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
I only attended the July 25th joint meeting with Mission Springs Water District, which was very nice and well planned.
Thank you. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Since the last meeting, I attended online Desert Hot Springs City Council meeting on the 18th. They are not meeting today, so I get an evening off. I want to comment on the joint meeting we had on July 25th at the Mission Creek Groundwater Facility. I thought that was excellent. I mean, tremendous. I don't know how you organize an event out in the desert like that and make it successful, but they did it. You have to bring everything. It was the presentations were excellent, and I think we made some inroads on the Hearts and Minds campaign.
I think I might have just destroyed all
Yeah,
that.
you might have. But there's only one of you on here. So.
I know.
So I look forward to better cooperation with Mission Springs. We all have the same interest in serving the public. So that's it for me.
Thank you. Vice President Bowman?
Sadly, I was not able to attend the joint meeting because I was on vacation, but I have heard nothing but good things, so well done.
Thank you. So in addition to our regularly scheduled and special meetings, as well as committee meetings, I did attend two meetings on Monday, the 24th. The first was a virtual meeting with Assemblyman Garcia and some of his staff members. Really was an opportunity for us to to introduce ourselves to the Assemblyman and his staff. And if Mrs. Metzger wouldn't mind, I'm going to put her on the spot and ask her to perhaps give us a brief rundown on what was covered and where we go next.
Absolutely. I always appreciate the opportunity to be kept on my toes. So thank you, President Ortega and members of the board. We had a really nice, productive session with the Assembly member. We spoke at length about the agency's bond funding priorities. So we were able to talk about, the fact that we'd really like to see funds go toward the State Water Project and the voluntary agreements. We spoke about recycled water and the fact that for Desert Water Agency, the verbiage related to recycled water would need to be a little bit different than what we may be seeing other agencies ask for, because the focus of our program would be more on connections and the costs associated with that. We also spoke about septic to sewer projects and making sure that the language included in the bond is sufficient for Desert Water Agency. We brought the issue of septic to sewer to Assemblyman Garcia, primarily as it relates to our interest in water quality in both the Indio and Mission Creek basins, not necessarily something that we anticipate directly using. We also spoke with the Assemblyman about coming for a tour, and then we spoke with him about a bill on non-functional turf, and he volunteered to speak with the author of that bill and convey some of our points there. So we've been working with Bob Reeb to kind of assemble lots of recommendations and go back to the Assemblyman to kind of further our efforts, both on the bond and on the relevant legislation. And he did indicate that once the weather cools down, he would like to come and take a tour.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on the invitation made to him with regard to touring our facilities. I think it's really important for this agency to actively engage with elected officials, whether they be congressmen or senators or assemblymen or state senators that represent all or part of our service area, as well as city officials, whether they be from Desert Hot Springs, Palm Springs, Cathedral City, and even the county. I understand that Secretary Treasurer McKenna had given an invitation to the Desert Hot Springs, or made an invitation to the Desert Hot Springs council members to attend our event last Tuesday, which I very much appreciated. And I also did the same with Assemblyman Garcia, Assemblymember Garcia on that virtual meeting on Monday, as well as with the City Council of Palm Springs that evening when I attended the meeting, their meeting on Monday evening. Not only went there to speak and thank them for their contribution to their financial contribution and support of our turf rebate program, and also, again, extending that invitation. And so I think that's something that this agency has perhaps not been so aggressive about, but something that's really important to me. And we'll hope to continue to do that in the years to come, especially as we bring, as newly elected officials from this area take their office. And with that, I don't have any other meetings to report. And so we can go to director's comments, which is item number 11 on our agenda. We'll start with Director Gracia.
I have no comments and no questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Director Bloomer?
No comments.
Okay. Secretary Treasurer McKenna?
Just one. I'm reading as I read a lot. The UCLA has been studying the Colorado River and they think that the volume of water coming down the Colorado River will be half by 2050. So let's keep an eye on that one too. Thanks.
Thank you. Vice President Baumann?
Nothing from me.
Thank you. And nothing more from me. So with that, we can close the open session and move on to closed session. I have 9:34, so at 9:45, if we could meet in closed session in the conference room. Thank you very much.
Recording stopped. Recording in progress.
1, 2. 1, 2.
Yeah,
Me.
it is. Yep. All right. So I'm reconvening this meeting into open session, and we do have an action item out of closed session, which is item 12E, labor negotiations. This is an employment agreement between Desert Water Agency and Steve L. Johnson. The board has, in closed session, reviewed the document provided for item 12E, and I will look for a motion to accept. And
Move for approval?
all right, thank you, Director Gracia. I'll look for a second.
I will second that.
Thank you, Secretary Treasurer McKenna. May we have a vote, please?
Can we just clarify what the vote is for, the motion's for?
It's to accept the item from closed session, item 12E, which is employment agreement between Desert Water Agency and Steve L. Johnson.
Thank you. Director Gracia,
Aye.
Director Bloomer,
Aye.
Secretary Treasurer McKenna,
Aye.
Vice President Bowman,
Aye.
and President Ortega.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Congratulations, Mr. Johnson.
All right, so with that, we can adjourn the meeting, which is item 14. Thank you, everybody, for your help today, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.